Valkyrie Elysium dropped in November of 2022, and it honestly has a horrible rating, sitting at about 60% on Steam for the past few months and 44% overall. Honestly, for good reasons. The game has its fair share of issues and things that have never been fixed from what I can see, but I caught it on a crazy good sale for PS5 one day when I was out shopping. Then I started sifting through what games I could potentially play and review on PS5, and I decided to stupidly pick this one up. And of course I decided to torture myself and go for the Platinum trophy. Okay, that was a little mean. How bad can a game with a 40% overall rating really be? The game has its flaws, but honestly, I personally had a ton of fun with this game, even with the lack of a compelling plot to really drive me to enjoy the story, the characters being pretty boring and not having much to them other than repeating conversations. But don't forget about all the grinding that you'll have to do for the Platinum trophy. But anyways, here's my review after getting the Platinum trophy on Valkyrie Elysium. Normally I would just call it a 100% review, but honestly I couldn't be bothered committing any more time to this game and finishing the expansion pack trophies, so I got the Platinum and called it a day. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. You managed to make your way here and find this video, why not stay and check out some other games and find my honest reviews of them. Hit the like button, comment some games for me to play, and don't forget to subscribe. Or don't. It's your choice really. Thanks for watching. Let's jump into the story for this game. Now, with this basically being a review of the entire game, since I'm going to be talking about it after getting the Platinum trophy, there's definitely going to be spoilers within this game. If for whatever good reason you had this game on your backlog and you wanted to play it at some point, skip this section and probably the next one. The game starts off with you being introduced in the tutorial to the Valkyrie, and you'll be learning basic combat, how to use your summons and divine arts. Once you finish the tutorial, you'll be introduced to Odin, and you'll learn that you are a newly created Valkyrie whose sole objective is going to be purifying souls to help Odin regain his lost power after the previous war. So at this point, you really don't know any better. You have no memory of anything other than an unwavering loyalty towards Odin because he's your creator. The main story is broken into 9 different chapters, and the first 2 will introduce you to your Inheriar, and I can't really say it very well, so I'll just be referring to them as the Valkyrie soldiers or her summons. There will be a total of 4 of them, and I'll talk about them more later in this video. But anyways, the first 2 chapters will teach you about what happens to the souls of the living if they're unable to pass on. The 3rd and 4th chapter will unlock your second summon, but also within the 4th chapter, you'll accept a new task from Odin and you will begin looking for the 4 gifts. The 5th chapter gives you your 3rd summon as you look for another gift. The 6th chapter gives you your last summon within the game. As you search for the 3rd gift, you actually end up losing it and you will be introduced to Fenrir. The entire time you meet Fenrir, the only job of Fenrir is to try to confuse the Valkyrie into questioning everything she believes, in the hopes that she will turn on Odin and defeat him and side with Fenrir instead. But then the 7th, 8th, and 9th chapter are all setting up the end game at this point. There really isn't much else to do within these chapters. Throughout all of the chapters, you'll have only met 2 distinct characters who you see throughout the game, a previous Valkyrie named Hilde, who works for Fenrir, as well as Armand, who is a man you repetitively see throughout your travels, but that's just the general gist of the main story. My overall thoughts on the story is, it's insanely short and super fast paced. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I never really felt like I was able to connect to any of the characters. Another thing I wasn't exactly the biggest fan of is the lack of personality within the Valkyrie. I understand her sole objective is to serve Odin, and that's why she was created and that's what she believes, but even at the end when she discovers the truth behind everything, I never felt like she was emotionally committed to anything. As well as honestly, the plot and the villains are pretty underwhelming. I'll get more into those endings later too, but I just felt like at some point all of the work I had put in to finish the game the very first time, and the ending I got did not feel super rewarding. Honestly, none of the endings really felt rewarding for what you had to do. I just think they could have done so much better with the story. Even if they didn't want to change the story, leave it exactly the same, just give me some characters emotionally intact and I can feel more connected to them, so that way the endings feel more rewarding. Bouncing off of the main story, throughout your time playing this game, you'll experience multiple different endings depending on the certain events that take place within the game. There are 4 different endings in total, and if you are trying to 100% the game or even just get the Platinum trophy, you have to complete each one of them. The first ending you will probably end up seeing is the generic ending that will occur after beating Fenrir, and as long as you don't speak to Armand in chapter 9, you will receive the generic ending. I honestly had no clue that he was in chapter 9, so this is the original ending I got. After defeating Fenrir, Odin will teleport you in and whisk you away once he receives the gifts, and he will begin to create a new world. This one was pretty sad because it was one of the only times the Valkyrie showed true emotion, and that was due to her losing her summons, since they would not be able to join her in the new world. She was attempting to join them in the afterlife, but of course Odin would not allow that. The next ending that can happen is considered the good ending, which basically can occur if you have not collected all the verdant blossoms and if you speak to Armand and decline his request in chapter 9. This will actually trigger for the Valkyrie to turn on Odin. In the end, you will end up having to take on Odin. However, this only happens after you take on each of your summons, as he managed to take control of them and pit them against you. After defeating each of your summons, you will face Odin when he is almost able to land a successful blow on the Valkyrie. Her summons will return and defend her and assist in defeating Odin. This one was a ton of work for a simple cutscene at the end. I mean, you face Fenrir, all 4 of your summons, and Odin, and all you get is defeating Odin and saying that you'll keep an eye on Fenrir. Next up is the bad ending, which basically will occur if you end up accepting Armand's offer in chapter 9. To offer some clarity of the situation, Armand takes you to a field where you realize You were Armand's lover in your past life, and the field he has taken you to is the place that you passed away after being killed by some monsters, which ended up leading to Odin grabbing your soul and creating you into the Valkyrie. But you basically just walk away and forget about your old duties as a Valkyrie. The last ending is what's considered to be the true ending, which will occur if you collect all the verdant blossoms and decline Armand's offer. Basically, you still have to face off against Fenrir and win, but instead you will end up facing off against Odin without him taking control of your summons. After defeating Odin's basic form, you will then face off against Ragnarok Odin. This one was pretty tough, not really in terms of difficulty since the game is super generous when it comes to timing your dodges, but it took like 5 minutes before I realized his weakness is cycled, so I was essentially doing no damage for the first bit of the fight. But also, he has a ridiculous amount of HP, so I completed this ending on hard and it took forever. The subquests within this game are pretty dull and boring. There are a few that do offer some more backstory to your summons and have some good items or divine arts, but most of them honestly are boring and it's just extremely repetitive, and it offers a single objective and all you do is purify monsters for the entirety of it. Overall, I think the subquests don't really add anything into the game other than keeping you busy and sometimes giving a decent reward, but that's it. The world of Valkyrie Elysium is broken into 5 different areas. Each of the 5 areas represent a different country and Midgard. Each of the summons that Valkyrie has typically belongs to one of these different nations. Each different area also has a set number of side quests that go along with it also. But let's actually talk about the world itself, and I gotta say it's pretty boring and dull. It doesn't really feel like there's any individuality. Now I know this game is going for an end of the world vibe, but honestly I wish there was really more than just either broken down buildings or decayed towns or just the same open areas that you get to see every single time that either occur in a forest or a mountain. Yes, you will have decent backgrounds, but the arenas you will be fighting enemies in are completely plain. There's nothing to them. And at first that can be okay, but when you have to continue to play the same missions or subquests to grind achievements, it's extremely boring. And I do wish they added more details to the cities or even some sort of life in the wilderness portions. Now the combat system for this game is honestly super fun and I enjoyed it a lot. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't have its flaws. Let's start with what I enjoyed. The combat can feel super fast paced when you add in summons and divine arts. You can finish fights fairly quickly even on the harder difficulties. It was kind of mindless fun and you could totally get by with just button mashing. But that's kind of where my enjoyment dies off. One of my biggest issues with the combat is the camera. I mean, it has the worst adjustment. Don't fight near a wall unless you want the camera to glitch into the wall and all you see is the Valkyrie's head. I thought maybe it was only just in crowded areas and that it would get better in more open areas, but even in those open areas your camera will get stuck inside larger enemies. I also thought how they implemented different enemy weaknesses was honestly pretty smart. Plus you have a summon that gives you access to each of those elements to use against them, except for dark. There's no summon for dark. You do have a divine art for the dark element, but it doesn't track the enemies. You impale a giant weapon into the ground, it's extremely good if it hits. Enemies can move last minute and basically be out of range and you've wasted an opportunity. And there's so many enemies toward the end of the game that have a weakness to dark, and you can use any element against them, but it'll just draw out the fight if you don't manage to hit your divine art. Another issue I had was occasionally using something like the lightning bolt divine art or the fire lance. They just end up missing, or they'll hit the enemy and not register the attack, so you've just wasted an opportunity. But before I forget, this game is actually extremely nice when it comes to the actual time frame. It gives you to dodge, counter, and parry, or just block an attack. It almost feels like you can wait until the absolute last second and it still manages to land the parry. But anyways, like I said, overall the combat is pretty fun and can be enjoyable if everything goes your way. Now, real quick, I know I kind of dove into everything without exactly explaining the combat system. So the Valkyrie has access to a soul gauge and an arts meter. The soul gauge is the blue bar below your HP and is used every time you summon one of your Inheriar. The amount you use will be affected by how long you summon them for. You can either choose 15 seconds, 30, or 60 seconds. You can also only have 2 summons out at a time. So if you summon a third one by your choice or an auto summon, it will pull whoever you summoned first back. The arts meter is below the soul gauge, which depending on the level of the divine art you're using will affect how much of the arts meter you use. Bouncing off the combat, I want to talk about the different weapons and divine arts the game has to offer. I'll start with the weapon. There are 6 different weapons available within this game, each one having a different style and skill set to go with it. But to be totally honest, only 3 of the weapons feel good. The other ones feel extremely underpowered, slow, or just meh. The starting weapon is my personal favorite. It's just a regular sword, but the combos with it feel smooth and it feels like it does quite a bit of damage. The other 2 I enjoyed are, well, I don't know how to say the names, so with the power of my editor, I'm sure he'll just show you them. But the spear felt fast and made combat very quick, but it still felt like the damage wasn't great. The sword reminds me of a greatsword and it does an insane amount of damage, but the combo for it, you have to charge up for the final hit and you can easily get interrupted and lose the combo. The other 3 weapons honestly felt slow or like they did no damage. Now, you will be able to upgrade your weapons in 2 different ways, which is upgrading them using gems that you gain throughout the game. I will discuss the gems more later in the video, or by defeating enemies and gaining proficiency. Now, upgrading the weapons is pretty easy and you'll probably have enough gems to upgrade all of your weapons by the final chapter, honestly. Upgrading them actually unlocks new combinations for the Valkyrie to perform or different skills, which can be pretty useful for some of the weapons. But onto the proficiency, and to be totally honest, I'm not even sure why this is here. It actually does nothing for the game and provides no added benefit that I noticed. The only thing that happens with proficiency is you get a letter next to the weapon and that's all. I ended up getting all the weapons to rank triple S, which is maxed, which I had to do if I wanted to get the platinum trophy, and it took me forever. To gain the most experience, you have to take on enemies without using your summons and divine arts and just defeat them with the weapon. This takes a ridiculous amount of time, and it really took me like 4 days to complete because I just didn't want to bother with it and doing the same missions over and over again, until I finally just committed to finishing it, and I didn't want to spend any more time with the game after completing the trophy. Honestly, this trophy is the reason I did not want to complete the last 3 trophies in the expansion pack. It really just killed the experience for me. Next, onto the divine arts. There are actually quite a bit of different divine arts that are offered to the player. Almost every element has 1 to 2 different divine arts, and each of them come in 3 different levels. Those levels only differ in strength and how much of the arts meter is used when casting the divine art. The only divine art that only has 1 skill is the dark element, but everything else has at least 2. There really isn't much to say regarding the divine arts other than they can help contribute to breaking enemies' postures so they will be immobilized, and then you are able to just dish out raw damage. Combine the arts with using your summons to make your attacks the same element. It really can make a fight much easier. Throughout the game, you will be able to level up your Valkyrie and make her stronger with her passive abilities and new skills. As you play the game, you will be collecting different gems that you will gain from either breaking boxes or objects in the world, or from chests, or just from defeating enemies. There is basically a tier list for gems that you will gain, and it depends on how far you are into the game and what chapter you're on. For instance, the last 2 gems that you will be collecting are the rainbow and black gems, which are mostly found in the last 2 chapters in the final area of the game. The game offers 3 different skill trees for you to advance in the duration of the game. There is attack, defense, and support skill tree. So to be totally honest, I didn't really pay attention to a majority of the skill trees because nothing really stands out within them. It seems like you get a lot more passive abilities and bonuses when upgrading compared to getting actual skills. Upgrading the attack tree, you will gain a lot of additional physical and magic damage. There are a few different skills like the soul burst, but I never really found myself using any of them. With the defense tree, you will gain physical damage reduction and magic damage reduction, and a few different auto summons. The support tree will give you more art and soul gauges so you can summon more. There is also some auto summons within this tree. Honestly, the auto summons is probably the most useful thing out of any of the trees. Don't stress about upgrading anything either, because I was almost maxed out on the skills by the 9th chapter also. The only reason I was not completely done is because some of the skills require certain weapons to be a certain rank, and we all know I couldn't deal with doing that. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about the enemies within this game, but they do offer a bit of variety when it comes to the enemies. You'll be fighting mostly spirits who have not crossed over yet. Typically, they're trapped or angry, and that anger turns them into a monster. By beating them, you will be actually purifying them and allowing their souls to cross over. The game has a limited number of bosses, with only about 4 throughout the first 6 chapters of the game, being the souls of your summons before you purify them, then fighting Fenrir and Odin depending on the endings you pick. Honestly, you fight Fenrir so many times, it almost accounts for more than half of the boss fights. The game does introduce early mini bosses, is what I would call them. They're just bigger monsters with more HP, but they become so frequent they end up becoming just another enemy within the game. So there's really no mini bosses either. They do have a bit of variety within the game, however, I do wish there were more unique bosses for me to fight, or even just mini bosses for me to remember. The retail price of the game on Steam is currently $59.99, and I gotta say, this game is completely not worth that price tag. The main story itself took me less than 12 hours on the hard difficulty, which is fine, but like I said, I felt like it was lacking so much. The graphics within the game are iffy. Normally I play most games on PC unless I get a decent discount on the PS5 or Switch, but even on the PS5 there's so many moments when I looked at the characters and you can just see the pixels. Some of the voice acting just has no emotions within it, and the only thing going for the game is the combat, which can die off pretty quickly. The concept for the game is honestly pretty neat, but there's so many points where they could have made it so much better, but they didn't. I honestly don't even think I can recommend this game. The only way I would recommend it is if you find it for more than 50% off, and if you just want something quick that you won't get your hopes up too high for. Well, there's my review of Valkyrie Elysium, and thanks for stopping by. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking it out. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, comment any games you want to see me 100% or just review, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.